The heavy oak doors of Courtroom 4B slammed shut, with a finality that made the very air vibrate inside. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of floor wax, old paper, and the suffocating weight of an impending tragedy. Officer Brock Miller, a man built like a fortress with a jawline of chiseled granite, leaned over the witness stand, his face a mask of calculated, predatory fury. He slammed his massive fist down on the wooden railing, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the vaulted ceiling. "She is a menace," Miller screamed, his voice cracking with a manufactured rage. He pointed a thick, accusing finger at the quiet woman sitting at the defense table. She was aggressive, disrespectful, and physically violent. "I've been on the force for 15 years, and I have never seen such unprovoked hatred. I feared for my life." Sarah Jenkins sat perfectly still. At 52, she possessed a preternatural calm. That seemed to irritate Miller more than any shout or protest could have. She didn't fidget, she didn't weep. Her posture was a masterclass in discipline, her back straight and her hands folded neatly atop the table. She wore a simple, sharp blazer and a white blouse buttoned to the very top. To the casual observer, she looked like a retired librarian or a Sunday school teacher. She simply watched the man lying about her with eyes that were dark, deep, and held a history he couldn't possibly comprehend. Miller smirked, certain of his victory. He was a local hero, frequently featured on the news for high-profile drug busts. He had a perfect conviction record and a badge that he used as both a weapon and a shield. He didn't notice the small, glinting object pinned to the lapel of Sarah's jacket, partially obscured by the shadow of her collar, but Judge Arthur Higgins noticed. Higgins, a 7-year-old veteran of the bench, known as the Hammer for his harsh sentencing, leaned forward, his wire-rimmed glasses slid down his nose. As he squinted at the defendant, as he caught the reflection of the gold star and the distinct blue ribbon, the color drained from his face until his skin matched the white of his hair. The gavel in his hand trembled. He knew that medal. He had seen it in history books and at the highest military ceremonies. It was the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest military honor for extreme gallantry in combat. "Officer Miller," the judge interrupted his voice, a low, dangerous rumble that silenced the prosecutor's next question. "I suggest you choose your next words with extreme, perhaps even prayerful caution." Miller, blinded by his own arrogance and the rush of the lie. "Didn't take the hint, Your Honor. The facts are the facts." She lunged at me during a routine stop. She tried to grab my service weapon while screaming obscenities. People like her have no respect for authority. She's nothing but a criminal in a nice coat. Sarah stood up slowly. The movement was fluid, authoritative, and utterly devoid of the erratic rage Miller had described. The courtroom went so silent, you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. She reached up with steady fingers and pulled back the lapel of her blazer, fully revealing the medals pinned to her blouse. The gold Distinguished Service Cross, 2 purple hearts and a silver star. "Officer Sarah," said, her voice melodic and low, yet it carried to the back of the gallery like a command. "You speak to me of honor, you speak of fear. I have held the intestines of my friends in my hands while they cried for their mothers. In the middle of a desert, I have faced the Republican Guard while taking mortar fire. I walked into the kill zone 6 times to drag my men to safety, while the devil himself was firing at me. I know what adrenaline is, I know what danger looks like, and right now, looking at you, I see a man who isn't brave." Just small. Judge Higgins dropped his pen. It clattered loudly on the floor. "Major Jenkins, you are retired Major Sarah Jenkins. 101st Airborne Combat Medic, yes." "Your Honor," she replied. "Class of '91, Operation Desert Storm." The prosecutor, Thomas Henderson, began frantically shoving papers into his briefcase, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal. It failed to run a proper background check, assuming an aging woman from the South Side was an easy win. Miller, however, turned a sickly shade of ash. He tried one last desperate gambit, his voice rising to a frantic pitch. "It's fake stolen valor. She's playing a character. She probably bought those at a pawn shop to trick the court." "Silence," Higgins roared, standing up and towering over the bench. "Officer Miller, if you speak one more word, I will have the bailiff gag you. You are in a court of law, and you're standing in the presence of a woman who has sacrificed more for this country than everyone in this room combined." Earlier that morning, Sarah's young court-appointed attorney, David Ross, had received a mysterious email. It was a video filmed by a bystander across the street from the traffic stop. a teenager filming a TikTok, who had accidentally captured the entire encounter. Higgins ordered the video to be played on the large monitors. The footage was undeniable. It showed Miller pulling Sarah over. It showed Sarah stepping out of the car, with her hands clearly raised to her shoulders. Complying perfectly, it showed Miller without provocation, grabbing her by the hair and slamming her face into the roof of the car. The gallery gasped. A woman in the front row sobbed, but the most damning part came at the end. The video showed Miller reaching into his own utility belt, checking his surroundings, and dropping a throwdown knife next to Sarah's handcuffed body to justify his use of force. The state moved to dismiss all charges with prejudice. Henderson squeaked, his career flashing before his eyes. Granted, Higgins growled, his eyes fixed on Miller. But we are far from finished, bailiff. Arrest Brock Miller, immediately charge him with perjury, aggravated assault and planting evidence. Take his badge, he is no longer fit to wear it. The handcuffs clicked on Miller's wrists. The very man who had swaggered into the room as a king was now being dragged out, like a common thief, screaming about rights he had denied so many others. The fallout was a scorched earth campaign of justice. The investigation into Miller's past opened a Pandora's box. Within weeks, the city, terrified of a federal civil rights lawsuit, settled with Sarah for $4 million. But Sarah Jenkins didn't want a life of luxury. She had seen what happened her neighborhood when people felt abandoned. 6 months later, the Jenkins Veteran and Community Center stood where a drug-infested lot used to be. It was a masterpiece of red brick and glass featuring a gym, a coding lab, and a sprawling garden. Sarah directed the construction herself, climbing scaffolding to inspect welds, and ensuring every cent was used to uplift the youth and the veterans of the city. 1. Tuesday night, a cold wind whipped through the streets. Sarah was working late in her second-floor office. She wasn't surprised when she heard the back door lock click. Her military intuition had been screaming for days that Miller's old partner, Detective Shaughnessy, was lurking in the shadows. Graves was the cleaner for the corrupt circle Miller belonged to, and he wanted revenge. Graves slipped into the basement carrying jerry cans of gasoline. He planned to burn the center to the ground. With Sarah inside, he reached for the main support beams, unscrewing the cap of the gasoline. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," a voice said from the darkness. Graves spun around, drawing a concealed pistol. The industrial light slammed on. He blinked, blinded. When his vision cleared, he realized he wasn't facing an old woman. He was surrounded. Standing in a semicircle were 6 men. Regulars at the center, they were former Rangers, Marines, and a Navy SEAL. They didn't look like crippled veterans. They looked like a firing squad. "You walked into the wrong house," Detective Sarah said, walking down the stairs with a calm that chilled Graves to the bone. Before Graves could fire, a heavy sandbag swung from the rafters. Triggered by Leo, the blue-haired kid from the TikTok video, it hit Graves in the chest with the force of a car, throwing him against the concrete wall. The gun skittered away. The veterans moved in with silent, terrifying efficiency, zip-tying Graves before he could even gasp for air. Sarah had coordinated with the FBI weeks ago. They had tapped the prison phones and heard Miller give the order from his cell. They were waiting outside to catch Graves. In the act of domestic terrorism, the final blow for Brock Miller came in a federal court because he had ordered a hit from prison. His original charges were upgraded to racketeering and attempted murder. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. He was transferred to a supermax facility in Colorado, a concrete box where he would spend 23 hours a day in total silence, haunted by the memory of the woman he thought was an easy target. Back at the center, the community flourished. On the 1-year anniversary, David Ross, now a successful lawyer who handled the center's legal clinic for free, sat with Sarah in a rose garden. "They want to name a street after you," Sarah David said, smiling. Sarah looked at the children playing on the new grass and the veterans sitting in the sun. Finally at peace, she felt the weight of her medals in her pocket. Not as a burden, but as a foundation. "Tell them to keep the street name," Sarah said, standing up and smoothing her blazer. "Just tell them to keep the lights on and the doors open. We have work to do, and the weeds don't pull themselves." She walked back toward the building, a soldier of peace who would turn a moment of corruption into a legacy of hope. Sarah Jenkins proved that the hardest steel is forged in the hottest fire, and that true power never needs to shout. It simply waits for the truth to catch up.